So today, here we have in the 20th in the 20th century, there had been lots of development and progress, advancements in the world, and Tibet has gone through lots of difficulties, turmoil, and some Tibetans were able to come into exile, and not only to work for their own livelihood, but to keep and preserve our own tradition, which comprise the Tibetan traditional cultures, as well as the great wisdoms of the great Nalanda masters, which the teachings of whom can be verified through reason and logic. And so we have been able to preserve this tradition, which is like our own life. And so we have tried our best to preserve this in the 20th century, and also now we are in the 21st century, where all the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, the monastic institutions, while they had very little facility, people put effort and worked hard to preserve our own traditions. And then within the Gelug's tradition, the 6 monasteries, or the 3 great seats of learnings, and then Gyatso and Gyumey and Tantric monasteries have also done the same. And since we came into exile, it's been over 56 years. In 1959, when we first came into exile, and since then we have done our best, and many of the people who came out in 1959 have passed away, and they were great masters, scholars who were comparable to the Nalanda masters even, and so they are also no more with us. So under very poor conditions, they taught the younger generation, and they actually nurtured them, the younger generation of Tibetans. And amongst them is Gyatso Sherab Singye, who was the heart disciple of Jamgon Lama Tsongkhapa. So Gyatso Sherab Singye, when Rinpoche asked who would be able to uphold this teaching of Samaja Tantra especially, and so Gyatso Sherab Singye pledged to do that. And so since then, there was Segyu tradition in Lobsang region in Rinpoche. And then there was also the Wensang Nyingyu, the Ansapa ear whispered lineage, and Shungpawa, which refers to the Tantric college of Gyutu and Gyumey. And so of these two Tantric colleges, here we are at Gyumey Tantric College, founded by Jiten Sherpa Sengye, and so we are going to have a discourse on the Dharma and empowerment of Gyasamaja Tantra. There are many new monks in Gyumey, and Gyasamaja Tantra is one of the most important tantras, which is even claimed as the king of tantras. Of course, it should not just be left in words, saying that Gyasamaja is the king of tantra, but if you really read the tantra and explanations, the essence of tantra is about union and attaining the three bodies in without and with ease. And so, Gyasamaja Tantra, Dupa or communion here refers to the union of body and mind, becoming of one essence or nature. And so, regarding the explanation and also the the teaching which has the essential points of how to take the three states into the three parts, three states of death and intermediate, taking into the Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya, and rising into Sambhogakaya form, which is called the Long Tangbu Gombo, the primordial Lord. And so Gyasamaja Tantra has the special explanation of these points. And so regarding the highest yoga tantra, the Gyasamaja has the essential points of the highest yoga tantra as well. And so Gyuey Master Nagarjuna has emphasized mainly on the Gyasamaja Tantra, and he has written the Dorje and Dose, integrating the Sutra and Tantra with his explanation, and Dorje is like a sadhana. And then Aryadeva, Master Aryadeva, wrote the Jodu Charyamilapaka, and then Master Chandrakirti wrote the Pratibodhyatana, and then Master Tsongkhapa took special interest in Gyasamaja Tantra, and of his 18 volumes of his writings, he has written many tantric treatises, and there were about almost 5 volumes on Gyasamaja Tantra. And so he was, the Gyasamaja was in practice. And so, with regard to the study and practice of Gyasamaja Tantra, whether the monks in these monasteries like it or not, or they take it as their obligation, and they have been able to keep the tradition. And so, without this tradition of the Gyutu and Gyumey Tantric colleges, the explanation of the Gyasamaja Tantra would not have survived. And so, as Sajjada Rinpoche has also listened to the teachings in Dharamsala, and then, as I have urged and appealed to the monasteries which did not traditionally have study of philosophy, to study the philosophy. And so, today we have monks in this monastery, Tantric College, who have actually heeded my advice to study philosophy. And so even the, I mean, this, it's what you have been able to achieve so far is the result of the geishis who join here, who have taught the monks, and also the monks having taken interest. And so this is a monastic institution where you have the opportunity to listen to reflect on, and meditate on the highest yoga tantra of Gyumey Tantra. And this year I did a Gyumey Tantra initiation at Gyatso Tantric College as well. And so here also I'm going to do give the Gyumey Tantra initiation. And so everyone who has been involved in organizing this program have done very well, so I'd like to thank you. And mainly I have also come to conclude the teaching on Lamrim teachings, which I'm going to complete this year. So I feel fortunate. I'm almost 81, and I can feel the degeneration of my body. There are signs of degeneration of my body, but at the request of Ling Rinpoche, I have started the teaching of Lamrim texts, and so most of the texts have been finished. But then I'm going to finish the remaining text, and I'm going to do this in Tajilumbo Monastery, after where I will be going to inaugurate the new temple assembly hall. And Tajilumbo Monastery is especially known for the study of logic and epistemology, the Pramana Vartika. And so it seems that J. Gyumey Drup had a special responsibility to spread the teaching of epistemology and logic. And so we have the I'll talk about this later, regarding the transmission lineage of the Pramana Vartika. So here we'll do the Gyumey Tantra and initiation, and then the 8 great commentaries of Gyumey Tantric College will be taught after that. So although I do not know much, but I'm familiar with the teaching. So after having received the Gyumey Tantra initiation from Gyabje Ling Rinpoche, not perhaps right from the beginning, but I have been doing the generation stage practice, sadhana, every day. And so since Rinpoche has taken it very seriously, the Gyumey practice, it's not just enough to say that, oh, it's a really great teaching, but we need to know what are the essential points in terms of how to take the 3 states of death and so forth into the 3 kayas or Buddha bodies. So here, while you take the initiation, if with great interest, it should not be just so that done so that you can count how many times you have received the initiation, but you should do your best to leave an imprint on the Gyumey Tantra practice, and particularly these 5 stages. And so you should make that a point. And in Lama Chepa, Guru Puja, which we usually recite, there is mention of how to combine the clear light and illusory body. And so So if you can make your prayers to be able to integrate and incorporate the 5 stages of the Gyatso Tantra within yourself, I mean, it would be very good. So those who can actually do the practice, you should endeavor to do the sadhana every day, the practice of the Gyatso sadhana every day. Yes, if you could say just the generation stage practice, which is called Tangjor, the initial practice. And then if you could, in time, also do the serviceable retreat, approximation retreat practice. There are texts which you can use for this. That the rituals that we have are mainly meant for practice and not just reciting. So usually we take these texts to be just for recitation. That's not the point. But Khyentse Rinpoche has mentioned that when you do the deity yoga practice, it's to do it without actually reading the text or saying the words, but focusing on the meaning, that subject matter of the text. And so sometimes when I have time, I do that. So Ling Rinpoche used to actually go over and over as he was, when he was saying the sadhanas, and if he had been distracted, he would redo this part of the sadhana. And so the most important thing is to meditate, do the meditation. So after saying the 6 session Guru Yoga, you dissolve the master into yourself and then meditate on emptiness. And within that, you see that your mind and the Guru's mind are of one taste or one nature. And then from within that emptiness, you meditate on, of course, the clear light. And from within the clear light, you arise into the illusory body. And so in this way, you combine these two, the clear light and the illusory body, and to reach the union state. So as far as I can say, my opinion is in the 6th session Guru Yoga, when you So if you go through the process of meditating yourself as the Yabyum, and then go through the process of you go through the process of dissolution, and then at the end rise into the single Vajradhara. And so in order to do the tantric practice, you also need to be trained in the common practice, the shared practice. And within this, there are the bodhicitta and emptiness. And so it is even said that thanks to the sutra, which combines the practice of the method and wisdom, your tantric practice would be effective. Just as the Tibetans have this cheese, which is made of cheese and crumbled cheese, or powdered cheese, which is mixed with butter, and it becomes tasty and nutritious because of the butter. So within the Tantric Yoga practice, you have the extensive practice of the deity yoga, where you imagine the deities, and for that you need to arise into the deity from within the meditation on emptiness. so that mind which perceives emptiness transforms into the deity, and therefore meditation on emptiness is indispensable in in deity yoga practice. And so, in India, there used to be masters who may be either following Madhyamaka or Chittamatra philosophical view. And as their practice becomes more and more advanced and profound with regard to the clear light, then they could actually shift, their philosophical view could shift to Madhyamaka view. So without understanding of emptiness, we can't do much with the deity yoga practice. So with the emptiness, a view of emptiness, of course, whether you turn this emptiness into a means which takes you to mere liberation or Buddhahood, the meditation on emptiness alone will not lead you to Buddhahood, but you need to combine it with bodhicitta. So if you wish to cook vegetable, you need water and also the different flavors, to salt and so forth. So bodhicitta and the meditation on emptiness, view of emptiness, are like this. So you should train your mind to such a point that you actually, even in dreams, you are engaging in called reflection on meditation or emptiness and bodhicitta. So for the teaching discourse here, we have several texts. So first we'll have the praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination, written by Master Tsongkhapa, which is very full of blessing, and it is like a king of prayers. So this text really shows the quality, the profundity of the teaching of the Buddha. So Rinpoche in this text says these lines, where he, on page 13, verses 31, 32, and 33, His Holiness read. If you have. So Rinpoche himself went through the process of meditation on emptiness very arduously, and once he was gained, as it is said in the three principles of the path. However, at some point, when without alternating but at once, the instant you see the dependent origination is undeceiving. If the entire object of grasping at certitude is dismantled, at that point your analysis of the view is completed. And so I memorized this praise of the this praise by Tsongkhapa when I was young in Lhasa. So I was quite good at memorizing text. And then I also asked the monks of Namgyal Monastery to memorize this text as well. And so it's a very special teaching. So regarding the destiny fulfilled, there is not much explanation, transmission, or the lineage of the explanation of this text. So since we are engaged in Dharma discourse, we must be able to turn the teaching of Dharma to become a teaching of Dharma. And therefore, regarding your motivation, if your motivation becomes tinged by 8 worldly concerns, then your practice will not be a Dharma practice. It won't become a Dharma practice. So you should, if you could actually, if you are not able to tinge the teaching or the practice with the bodhicitta, then it won't become a Mahayana teaching as such. And so just as for a teaching to become a Buddhist teaching, you should be able to do and practice the teaching tinged by the principle of taking refuge in the 3 jewels, and to make this practice, Mahayana practice, you should be able to influence your practice, impact it with bodhicitta. And so we talk about the 3 objects or 3 jewels. So Jainism, non-theistic Sankhyaism and Buddhism do not believe or accept Creator God. And Buddha himself has said, you are your own master. So if you actually believe in a theistic religion, Creator God, then you actually believe that everything is in the hands of the God. Whereas in Buddhism, this is not the case. And it's not in the hands of the Buddha, but in your hand. And therefore, we have the Dharma jewel, which refers to liberation, and for which we have to work on our mind. And try to develop this view of emptiness, which when you realize the emptiness directly, and then with the help of that, then you should be able to develop or attain true cessation. And therefore, these 2, the true path and true cessation, comprise the true Dharma jewel. And therefore, we say, I take refuge in the Dharma jewel. So for us, without any experience of the Dharma, of course, we will not be able to develop the path or the Dharma jewel, the true Dharma jewel within ourselves. And therefore, you need someone who you can look up as your role model, someone who has gone through the process of learning or studying the text, listening to the teaching, and then gains reflection, gain conviction through reflection, and then have some experience of the Dharma within themselves. And when you see such a person, then you also feel inspired to follow such person. And therefore, ultimately, our goal is to reach the Buddhahood, comprising the 4 Buddha bodies. And for that, we need to develop the Mahayana true path and true cessation, and then progress along the 10 Bodhisattva grounds. And therefore, we need to develop again the true path within ourselves, those who have not yet developed it, and then we travel along a journey on the path as referred by the Heart Sutra mantra, Gati, Gati, Paragati, Parasamgati, Bodhi Swaha. And so, in this way, we have to develop the path and take refuge in the Dharma jewel, 3 jewels. And so, in this prayer, we say, I take refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. It shows the practice of taking refuge. And then the next 2 lines, which is through the practice of generosity and so forth that I've done, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of sentient beings, shows the practice of bodhicitta. And so, we need to go through the 6 paramitas, the perfections, and reach Buddhahood. And therefore, from now, even now on, whatever merit we may have created and cultivated, you dedicate them for attaining Buddhahood and generate bodhicitta within yourself. So most of you, of course, would know what I have been saying. But if there are people who have not heard me often, I would like to say that when I explain this verse of taking refuge in bodhicitta, if you say through the merit of generosity and so forth, it's rather narrow. If you say through the collections of merit and wisdom, the two collections, then it becomes vast. So, such as generosity and so forth refers to the other perfections. And so the perfection of wisdom comes within and is referred by the so forth. So if you say that, when you say the line, through the practice of generosity and so forth, whatever collections I have gained, of course, the perfection of wisdom is not clearly, not explicit in it, but it is implicitly there. And so when you say, I take refuge, and then whatever merit I have generated or cultivated, or the wisdom and merit I have cultivated, you come across this term, word I. And so you have to reflect on the I. What is this I? Who am I? And if you reflect on this by using the line from Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which says the Tathagata is neither the aggregates and nor something different or separate from the aggregates and so forth. Even this strong sense of I that we usually have of ourselves will be reduced. And so when you come across these two words, I take refuge, the word I in these 4 lines, you should reflect on emptiness. Of course, it would be difficult to have a true insight or understanding of emptiness, but even if you can have some kind of a feeling of emptiness, it would be good. And so, with this understanding, please say this verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta. So from the side of the Lama also, I will reflect on these 2 principles of taking refuge and bodhicitta, and reflect on emptiness and bodhicitta. So Gyatso to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. Through the collections gained through generosity and so forth, may I attain Buddhahood to help sentient beings. Sanje Droba Shu Shenju Pardo Dani Gyatso Chen Dagi Jun Sonam Ki Drola Pinche Sanje Droba Shu. So in the tradition of Kunalama Rinpoche, after saying this verse of refuge and bodhicitta, he would say paragraph each from which is praise of praise to bodhicitta, Buddha, and he would recite verses from Mahayana Sutra Alamkara for that. And so I do not know those verses, of course, but Satya Pandita was said to have had a debate with a non-Buddhist master, and then and when the Shankaracharya or somebody who actually Satya Pandita debated with showed his miracles, he actually had to seek the assistance of the Mahasiddha Dacharva. in Tibet. And so Drupal Dajawa had a rather actually was not able to recite the Kilikila mantra very clearly. And so Sajja Pandita, when he found that out, he said, it's not Chili Chile, it's Kilikile. But then he said, I have been saying this in the past, and I will say this Chili Chile. So when he said the mantra, he actually pronounced instead of Kilikila, his Chili Chile. At the end of this Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Master Nagarjuna praises the Buddha, saying that I pay homage to the Gautama, who out of his compassion taught the holy Dharma to rid us of distorted views. So this is a very profound verse, very powerful. So before giving teaching of Buddhism, I usually give an introduction to Buddhism. So there are many people who have come from around the world, and then especially many foreigners have come here. So I usually give an introduction to Buddhism. So as I have said before, we all of us pray for all mother sentient beings, and we say, may all mother sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness and so forth. And so when I was small, I used to see people coming to Lhasa from Golok, and he was bare on the upper part of his body, so he made this prayer, may all mother sentient beings, in this typical voice. But of course, when he was in his own native place, Golok, then of course he must be engaging in killing animals. So even if we do not, as Tibetans, we do not know, Tibetans do not know much about the Dharma, but still we say this prayer for all mother sentient beings. So some people might say that it won't help, because you are so poor guy. How can you actually achieve such a goal? But that's not the case, as Master Shantideva says. Without exchanging one's own happiness with others' suffering, then leave alone reaching Buddhahood. Even in samsara, you will not have happiness. So there are 7 billion people on this earth, and everyone, right from their birth, wants happiness and not suffering. So even although that is the case, there are many people who kill others, who abuse others, and deceive others. How many of them are there, really? So even people who claim to be religious do this to others. And then, because of differences in our religions, people fight with one another. And at this very point, we are gathered here. We may feel very fortunate that we are engaging in this Dharma discourse, but at the same time, in Syria and Iraq, many people are being killed. So we are all same human beings. Nobody wants suffering, but happiness. But Why do people indulge in these acts which do not make them happy, but also make others suffer? So how can you have happiness by harming others? And also there is a gap between poor and rich. So I'm not talking about here past and future lives or liberation or heaven, but we need to live together in this planet. So if that is the case, it would be better. We would have be better off if we help each other. So we usually indulge in selfish goals. So even in samsara, there's no happiness, as Shantideva says, without exchanging one's happiness with the suffering of others. And so, this prayer that we do, may all mother sentient beings have happiness, is very precious. So if you are praying, if you are making this prayer, then we need to do something, at least for the people and the beings on this earth. The other galaxies or other world systems may not be directly related to us. So in this world there are innumerable animals, birds, insects, and so forth. I mean, we could just say prayers for them when we see them going through really difficult times. And for them, but for human beings, although we have different languages, we can still communicate and make them understand, others understand our views. So if we are the ones who pray for all mother sentient beings, then it is our responsibility to do what we can do for the 7 billion people on this earth. So while saying this prayer, if you abuse or bully someone who is near you, and still say that may I become a Buddha, may I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of sentient beings, as if the sentient beings are somewhere far away from you. That's not right thing to do. So in the new residence or residential quarter of Garden Rinpoche, so somebody brought some edibles to His Holiness. And His Holiness said this is not needed. So later on in the evening and after the teaching, I can perhaps enjoy this bread or some type of bread, Tibetan kapse. So they are going to also distribute this kapse to the public. So many years ago in Dharamsala, when I was teaching Lamrim, we distributed bread, and many monks and nuns were also taking bread. It was afternoon, in fact, and so I kind of urged that it would be better for the monks and nuns not to take bread. But when you are in your room, of course, you may take bread. So you can tell the Buddha, if you have a way to talk to him, I used to say that I actually seek permission from the Buddha when in the afternoons, if I have to eat something, for the reason that of my health. And so, for monks and nuns, we need to actually show example to others and not take bread in the afternoons or some edibles after lunch. And so we should do whatever we could to help others, benefit others. And so on this earth, without talking about future life, if just in this life, for good health and happy mind, joyous mind, we should work. And all 7 billion people, whether believers or non-believers, take care of our health. And if you really care of your physical health, then if you have a peaceful mind, then you will also have good physical health as well. So, if you could use our common sense, of course, you will find that it's important to have altruistic attitude towards others. Whether I've always been saying to people that whether you are a believer or not, it's important as human beings to be a good person. So keep this in mind. Even if you could actually help someone, a single person, to have good health and happy mind, and that would be good. And so altruism is the root of our happiness and good health. And then there are many religious traditions with philosophical views. And then all religions have 3 aspects, I usually say. The first one is religious aspect, and then of practice of love and compassion and so forth. And then this is actually backed up or supported by their philosophical views. The second is philosophical concept. And then there's the cultural aspect. So, with regard to the religious aspect, the essence is altruism, to have a kind heart. So all religions teach love and compassion. This is a shared message of all religions, whether Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, or Judaism, Buddhism, all have the same message. So we, as human beings, biologically are equipped with this love and kindness. So because we are survived, and we survive through love and affection. So many animals depend on their mothers for their survival. And so we naturally, something which we consider very precious, is taught by all the religious traditions, this love and compassion. And when it comes to the philosophical views, concepts, then there are differences. There are basically 2 camps within the religious traditions, those of theistic religion and non-theistic ones. And so, although there are differences in their philosophical understanding, but if you ask what's the purpose of these their philosophy is to promote love and compassion. So you have the same purpose, and therefore they are not in disparity with each other as such, because the purpose is the same. But you may ask, but then there are lots of conflicts amongst people because of religion, unnamed religion. So, even within Buddhism, we talk about different imprints of different philosophical views that we have in our mind. And so, one single philosophical view cannot be suitable to all human beings. So Buddha taught the Chittamatra view, because there were those amongst his disciples who could not actually, who are not receptive to the teaching of the Madhyamaka view of emptiness. And then there are the realist traditions within Buddhism, the Vaibhashikas and Sautantikas. And so in their teachings, the Buddha even sort of have indicated that there is a separate self. And so the theistic religions also help others, human beings. And those who follow non-theistic religions also, because of our mental dispositions, difference in mental dispositions, we need these different philosophical ideas and views. And so these different philosophies have the same purpose of promoting love and compassion. Therefore, we need religious harmony, and it's very important. So, of course, it's understandable if people fight with each other on grounds of some political views and economic views. Then, but when people fight against one another while professing to be following some religious tradition, and so it's very important for us to. So I also try my best to. I work for religious harmony, and then Tibetans follow the same Nalanda tradition, but the great masters, learned and adept of the past, because of their legacy, we have the Nyingma tradition, and then the Kagyu, and Sajja, and so forth. Of course, all this goes back to the Indian sources, Indian masters. So there are differences of emphasis on certain practice within one tradition, but we are all followers of the same teacher, the Buddha, and the follower of the same tradition, the Nalanda tradition. So in the past, when I did the Bue Samaja initiation, Khenpo Gyumey Tantric of the Nyingma tradition was here, and this time we have Sakya Tenzin Rinpoche. In Tibet, the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism would meet very rarely with one another. And after coming to exile, we had the opportunity to meet frequently. And because of that, we have become close to one each other and have been very harmonious with one another. And so I would like to thank Sajja Tenzin Rinpoche. You have done really worked hard. So I usually say that I am one of the 7 billion people on this earth. And so I really think seriously, and it's really beneficial for me. So if I say that I am a Buddhist and Tibetan, and then the Dalai Lama, for example, if I say I am the Dalai Lama and emphasize on this, then there's only one Dalai Lama in the whole world, and I would remain lonely. So that's so when I think that I am one of the 7 billion people, then it actually frees up my mind, makes me open. Opens up my mind. And so in Tibet, when I used to think that I'm the Dalai Lama, I mean, I had difficulties relating to some people, but since I've changed that opinion and thinking in that way, I mean, I really have benefited. And so, of course, ignorance is always there within everyone. And so I always, on this, from the point of view of being a human being, which is the first level that we are, on which we are all same. And then, as a Buddhist monk, I work for religious harmony in the world. And then, as a Tibetan, of course, the Tibetans inside Tibet have great hope in me. They put hope in me. And then the Tibetans who have come, who are living in exile, also have really worked hard. And so, Menpat, Mare, Bandra, Bandra. So there's a Tibetan settlement near Nagpur city, and the people, Tibetans who had actually moved down there, had to go there when it was in the middle of the summer, and they have actually requested later to shift somewhere else, because if we lived there, we would die. They told the leader of the Tibetans in the settlement. And then what we did was we actually distributed fans to each home. It was not possible for us to shift the settlement, the people, to somewhere. And so a year later, I visited the same settlement, and some of them I met. There was one old man who had actually said that they would die if they had to live there. I saw him and I told him, "Oh, you have not died yet." So the refugees in these villages and settlements have really gone through a very difficult time, cutting trees and using them as fuel for cooking and so forth in hot climate. And when I once visited their agricultural field, one of the bulls actually came after me, so I had to run away. So most of those people who initially moved to these settlements are no more now. And so they have really worked for the Tibetan people and Tibetan cause, and they have collected great merit. And so I have, as a Tibetan, I have responsibility for Tibetans. And so, with regard to the political responsibility, I have devolved it since 2012 completely. So not only that did I devolved my political responsibility, but I have actually relinquished the dual responsibility. Had stopped voluntarily, happily and proudly. So although I do not have anymore the political responsibility or authority, but what I have the responsibility on is to preserve Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, and Nalanda tradition, Buddhism, and in particular Nalanda tradition. And within the Nalanda tradition, we have the philosophical views of the Chittamatra Madhyamaka views, and also about emotions, which are relevant to the Tibet, to the whole world. And so this such a deep, profound culture has been preserved only by Tibetans. And Tibetan language itself developed further and further as we translated these Sanskrit scriptures, Buddhist scriptures, and therefore the Tibetan vocabulary for the philosophical views is very precise. So the profound philosophical views of Nalanda tradition can be explained precisely by Tibetan language. So it's not only for the Tibetans, but in today, even in China, there are over 400 million Buddhists, and so we could, many of them actually take interest in Tibetan Buddhism. And then similarly, we have the Japanese friends, the Dharma friends from Korea, Vietnam, and Japan, and so forth. So we could actually, through our language, we are able to explain these profound philosophical views precisely and clearly to these other Buddhists from these other countries. And then with regard to scientists, many of them, renowned scientists, are taking interest in psychology, the science of mind, because they see it's relevant and beneficial and important. So it's important to preserve our language, because we can serve the whole world. And so I take this as one of my responsibilities. And also I also take responsibility of preserving Tibetan ecology. So although physically I'm not well like before, but to preserve, in order to gain more understanding of the Nalanda tradition and Buddhist tradition in general, and the Nalanda tradition in particular, we are going to engage in this Dharma discourse. So let's go through this. The praise of dependent arising, dependent origination. I received this transmission from Lama Rinzin Tenpa, and I remember that he told me that he received it from Kansa Dorjishang. So this is also called the essence of true eloquence, a praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination. So first two verses are the praise, the verses of salutation from Mullah Madhyamaka Karika, and the Rinpoche's own writing starts from this. He who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him knower and teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror. You who saw dependent origination taught it, and so by seeing some one becomes unexcelled knower, and by teaching it one becomes unexcelled teacher, which is dependent origination. Whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, that the seeing of which will undo is ignorance. So we all say that we don't want suffering, but the Buddha has said that Buddhas do not remove the suffering of sentient beings, nor do wash away the sins of suffering of sins of sentient beings, and nor do they take away the suffering of sentient beings. No, do the Buddhas help us by shifting their own realization into us. So of course, if we could have a dream where we come across the Buddha and the Buddha actually helps us and we become enlightened, I mean, it would be good, but that doesn't happen. So the Buddha himself went through the process of development by accumulating merit and wisdom for over 3 countless eons. First generated bodhicitta and then engaged in this accumulation of merit and wisdom and then finally become enlightened. And so all our suffering are rooted in ignorance. It cannot be eliminated or overcome by medication. Physical pain, of course, you can overcome by medication, but not the mental. So of course there are practices related to Manjushri and so forth. By taking blessing, of course, there was one Tibetan master, Nyungun Tulku Tsongkhapa. He has said he was a great Gelugpa master, and then the Druptembe Nyemas Tugutsulu was a great master. So he has written texts on Madhyamaka, certain points of Madhyamaka philosophy. So they were really great masters with for whom you can have great faith. And so Nyingwen Tsongkhapa has said that in order to increase your wisdom or intelligence, rather than doing 1 month retreat on Manjushri, it would be better to actually engage in dialectical debate, procedure of debate. For 1 month. And so you should first listen to the teaching, as I said before, and then to gain conviction, reflect on it. Because once you gain conviction, then you would actually have the inspiration to practice the Dharma. And once you acquaint your mind with whatever conviction you have of the Dharma, then you will have experience of it. Of course, in the beginning, the experience would be rather something which you would be able to develop or have experience when you actually put some effort and not without effort. But then it becomes an effortless experience later. And therefore, this verse is very important. The root of all these is ignorance. So to uproot this ignorance, to uproot and overcome our suffering completely, we need to uproot this ignorance. And ignorance, within ignorance, there's the ignorance of causality, law of causality, and ignorance about the reality of how things are. And for that, you need to understand dependent origination. As Master Nagarjuna says, whatever is dependently originated is said to be empty. And that is dependently designated, and that itself is the middle way. And therefore, what you need to do here is to overcome or uproot our ignorance. This fundamental ignorance is to be able to deconstruct our called objectification of things. And therefore, it is very important to reflect on this dependent origination over and over again. How is this cup, this wooden cup? Does it look great? So Lhasa people have this saying that please, they would say, please do the prayers like the Lama Gyupas, the Gyudo and Gyumey monks, and also eat like them. Which means they have a huge wooden bowl to take their meals. So with regard to the ignorance now, to overcome it, morality does not overcome it. The Pratimoksha vows are meant for restraining ourselves, our body, physical and verbal actions, the 7. So morality itself will not uproot ignorance. So it actually helps us to restrain the wrong, our physical and verbal actions. And also, single-pointed concentration alone cannot overcome this. So certain amount of certain types of ignorance, of course, can overcome certain afflictive emotions which are within the desire ram. So the third verse says, so how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? This being so, who will find, O Savior, a more wonderful way to praise you than to praise you for having taught this dependent origination through dependence? Whatsoever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence, what excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this proclamation? So with regard to dependent origination, there is a dependent origination in terms of dependent causality, which is common to all the philosophical traditions or schools of Buddhism. But the subtlest dependent origination is the mere designation, that things are merely designated. So the reason is because this dependent origination does away with both the extremes of nihilism and eternalism. And so this is the unique reason to dispel the two extremes. By grasping at it, the child is strengthened bondage to extreme views. For the wise, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. So the realists and other philosophical traditions say that things have objective existence because they appear to us as objectively existing. So the reason that they give to prove that things have objective existence is used to disprove their objective existence in things. Since this teaching is not seen elsewhere, you alone are the teacher. Like calling fox a lion for a Tithika, it would be a word of flattery. Wondrous teacher, wondrous refuge, wondrous speaker, wondrous savior, I pay homage to you. That teacher who taught that well-dependent origination. This way of dependent origination, those who perceive it as contradictory or unestablished, how can they comprehend your system? Because they say that things have some objective independent existence, because if they do not have that way of existence, then they cannot exist. And so for such a person, when we use the reason, since that things are dependently originated as the reason to prove that the things have no objective existence. So this reasoning would be a contradictory reason, and for the non-Buddhist, it would be a reason whereby we are trying to establish something which doesn't exist. And whereas when one sees the opposite, Since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has functions, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed, that too not as an utter non-existence, nor as an intrinsic existence. The non-contingent is like a sky flower, hence there is nothing that is not dependent. If things exist through their essence, their dependence on cause and conditions for their existence is contradiction. Therefore, since no phenomena exists other than origination through dependence, no phenomena exists other than being devoid of intrinsic existence, you taught. So if things have some independent objective existence, then they cannot depend on others. Because dependence means they do not have any independent objective existence. Nothing can have any effect on them. No conditions will impact them. Therefore, who could challenge you, you who proclaim with lion's roar and in assembly of learned ones repeatedly that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature, that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising independent on that, what need is there to say that these two converge without conflict? So this next verse is very important. Choney was one of the main my assistant, debate assistants. Tsongkhapa was from Inner Mongolia. So he was really someone who was really taking interest in Madhyamaka view. So he inspired me, and he said, it is through the reason of dependent origination that one does not lean towards an extreme. And so this verse, he said, was very difficult for him to understand. That you have declared this excellently is the reason, O Savior, of your being an unexcelled speaker. All of this is devoid of essence, and from this arises that effect. These two certainties complement each other with no contradiction at all. What is more amazing than this? What more is more marvelous than this? If one praises you in this manner, this is real praise. Otherwise not. Being enslaved by ignorance, those who fiercely oppose you, what is so astonishing about their being unable to bear the sound of non-intrinsic existence? But having accepted dependent origination, the precious treasure of your speech, then not tolerating the roar of emptiness, this I find amazing indeed. The door that leads to non-intrinsic existence, this unexcelled door of dependent origination, through its name alone, if one grasps at intrinsic existence, now this person who lacks the unrivaled entrance, well traveled the but what means should one guide him to an excellent path that pleases you? Verse number 36. Verse number 37, amongst teachers, the teacher of dependent origination, amongst wisdom, the knowledge of dependent origination, you who are most excellent, like the kings in the world, know this perfectly well, not others. So all the scriptures of the teaching of Buddha tend towards suchness, and they flow towards suchness. They are actually land on suchness. I have difficulty with remembering names or titles of texts. This is a sign of aging. And so in the stages of meditation by Kamala Shila, he mentions this. All that you have taught proceeds by way of dependent origination. That too is done for the sake of nirvana. You have no deeds that do not bring peace. Alas, your teaching is such in whosoever ears it falls, they all attain peace. So who would not be honored to uphold your teaching? There are 2 volumes of the commentary by Kamala Shila on Tatuv Samgraha by Shandarakshita, wherein he mentions that on the basis of understanding dependent origination of causality, you create the causes for higher liberation, higher rebirth, and by understanding the suchness, dependent origination in terms of suchness, you create the causes for liberation. And so since it belongs to the Savatantrika Madhyamaka tradition, maybe talking about a certain degree of dependent designation. It overcomes all opposing challenges. It's free from contradictions between earlier and later paths. It grants fulfillment of being's 2 aims. For this system, my joy increases evermore. For its sake, you have given way again and again over countless years, sometimes your body, at others your life, as well as your loving kin and the resources of health. Seeing the qualities of this teaching pulls hard from your heart. Just like that, what a hook does to a fish, sad it is not to have heard it from you. So here, verse number 48, it says, "At such times I studied numerous works of one's own and others." So it could be interpreted, one's own and others could be interpreted as the systems of other traditions, non-Buddhist traditions or Buddhism. But here mainly it's a difference between So in the Chinese tradition, they are not they are not making much distinction between the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka philosophical views as such. My mind becomes tormented ever more constantly by a network of doubts. And then verse number 53 shows the author of this text. Following such a teacher and having become a renunciate, having studied the conqueror's words not too poorly, this monk who strives in the yogic practices, such is the depth of his reverence to the great seer. The text is completed. So the colophon says, this hymn entitled Essence of Well-Uttered Insights, praising the unexcelled teacher, the great friend to the entire world, even to the unfamiliar, for teaching the profound dependent origination, was composed by the well-read monk, Lobsang. It was written at the heavenly retreat of Hading on the towering mountain of Odegungel, otherwise known as the God number Gyalwe Ling. The scribe was Tsongkhapa. So first we'll have now tea. Tsongkhapa. La. 저거 마사 송스다 미비치니. 안저 사는 데 거다. Next we'll do the Dinan que towers. 배만 떼봐 숨겨있어로 또 소리 양하다 단지 때와 진이었어 Holiness is referring to verse number 53 of this text that we just read. So I found this very important to remember the legacy of Master Tsongkhapa. So on the 25th of the Tibetan 10th month, the death anniversary of Tsongkhapa, so I've said that we have to follow the footsteps of the Master Tsongkhapa, just as he has mentioned in his in this verse. And then in Gadnenhayama, it is mentioned that in this degenerate age, you have become someone who is very well read and learned and practiced and have engaged in the practice and not mixed with without mixing it with 8 worldly concerns. So we need to rejoice and admire Tsongkhapa from with regard to these qualities. So if you actually admire somebody, you need to also follow the person's the footsteps of the person. Otherwise, just praising the person and not really following the person is not. It doesn't make you. It's not real admiration. So if you are someone who really wishes to follow the legacy of Master Tsongkhapa, then you need to do it like this, as said in the Destiny Fulfilled. Oh, may we have happiness and excellence as the eyes of the world to see higher realms of life and freedom of enlightenment, resting place for those tired from wandering on the paths of psychic existence, the root of happiness and excellence, my kind gurus, and the noble Lord Wisdom treasure, I bow to your feet. To gather great store of merit and wisdom with little effort, rejoicing in virtue of others. Virtue is praised as best, particularly regarding the past virtues collected by oneself. If you develop without pride great joy in your virtues of the past, it is said that these past virtues will increase even more to accomplish the purpose of the statement by the Buddha. And also because I see many other purposes as well, it would be good, O mind, to feel such joy. In the beginning, so that how Rinpoche himself went through the process of study and so forth is said in this verse number 4. It says, in the beginning I sought much learning, in the middle all teachings dawned to me as spiritual exaltation. In the end I practiced day and night. I dedicated all these to virtue for the Dharma to flourish. So in the world, it is considered very important to set up schools because we want to overcome people's ignorance. And so just which are mainly meant for external development and progress, material ones. And so if that is the case, then we need also to emphasize the internal development as well. So with the darkness of confusion concerning the points of it to adopt or reject, not dispelled by the lamp of perfect learning, if you do not know even the path, what need to speak of entering the supreme city of liberation? Therefore, not content with partial or superficial understanding of the treatises of the invincible Lord Dharma, the Ajit Maitreya, and those of the great sages widely renowned in India. 6 ornaments are the 2 supreme ones. I studied them all in great detail, thinking this over, how well my destiny is fulfilled. Thank you very much, noble Lord, Miss Wisdom's treasure. So, as we do the study of the 18 classic texts, or the 13 great treatises, and also in the Gelug tradition, the title that we use is the study of the 5 canonical texts or scriptures. So I have actually said in the past that we could have people who could specialize in one of the canonical, these 5 canonical scriptures. So if we could, it would be good. So not content with partial or superficial understanding of the treatises, we could recite or from memory some text and also some explanations of the text as well. I find it important for us to study. It's important that the Master Bhaviveka's the Heart of the Middle Way and its auto-commentary are very important texts to study, to learn about the different philosophical views that existed in India. And then we also have the Druptas, the texts, genre of texts which are called Druptas, or the systems of tenets. To understand this and to study and understand them is very important, because then you will really have the understanding of the entire system of philosophical systems. And one of the masters, Upalosel, has written a Drupta. And then we also have Benjamin Sonam Tragwa's Drupta and Gyumey Tantric's great Drupta, and Gyumey Wangpo's also short Drupta. So these are very important texts for us to study. And then, of course, there are also philosophical views that didn't exist in India, such as Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and also Zoroastrianism, and so forth. But these also are theistic religions, traditions. They fall within this category. And so with regard to the non-Buddhist, Indian classical non-Buddhist traditions, we should not be content with what is given in our text only, but we could perhaps invite sometimes non-Buddhist masters to our monasteries and listen to them. So in Tibet, when we were in Tibet, of course, we couldn't do that. We didn't do that. But it seems there are few non-Buddhist, Hindu and other Indian masters whom we could invite to our monasteries. And then science is something new to us. In the beginning, when we started introducing the study of science in the monasteries, some of you were not so happy. You didn't feel comfortable with that. But as time went on, today we really feel proud to have introduced science. Especially for an ordinary person, the sole way to determine the precise reality of things are the treatises of valid reasoning. So, with much effort, I studied their difficult points again and again, thinking this over, how well my destiny is fulfilled. Thank you very much, noble Lord, wisdom treasure. Though I toiled in the treatises of Sutra and Tantra when practicing and expounding their profound meaning, I found my view had not advanced far beyond those who had learned nothing and who knew even less. So then I studied thoroughly all the essential keys to induce the correct view through the subtle dialectical reasoning that distinguishes the profound, especially the treatises of Nagarjuna, and resolved all my doubts completely. And so Rinpoche really worked really hard to gain deep insight into this understanding of the Master Nagarjuna's philosophical view of emptiness. And in the beginning, in one of his texts, which is the life account of Sadaprarudita, always crying Bodhisattva, Rinpoche had said that although things do not have any intrinsic existence, yet we could actually accept things because they exist in view of others, from the perspective of others. But that's later on it changed. So Rinpoche, if you could take Rinpoche as an ordinary person in the beginning, born in Amdo, and then Choje Tundro Rinchen taking care of him right from his childhood, and then advising him to go to central Tibet to study, when advising him the program of studying the treatises. And then he himself, having studied and at the feet of many great masters, many learned. And so, in his 20s, he became learned in the study of Panchaparamita Parchin, and then wrote the Rosary of Golden Rosary. As the fifth Dalai Lama has said, I became learned by I became a scholar by learning. So Rinpoche went through the process of learning and then reflecting and gaining conviction, and then finally doing practices of purification and gaining merit, and became an adept. And so if we could actually look at Rinpoche from this kind of angle, then we could also see an inspiration to take from him. So otherwise, if we say, oh, we are different, those masters are different, we cannot be compared with them, that would really discourage us. And so that is wrong. And so those great masters of the past have actually worked hard, and we could also do the same. We should study and then familiarize the Dharma within ourselves, and then become experienced. So, although I'm not boasting here, but to tell you some fact with regards to the Madhyamaka view and Bodhicitta, I have received teachings on them since my childhood. I have great admiration, but I felt Bodhicitta to be very far away from me. And then after coming into exile, I received teaching from Chikunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen on Bodhisattva Charyavatara, and then having received the teaching, I also began teaching this to others, and then Bodhicitta felt closer now and closer. Although I have not reached the Bodhisattva ground of Bodhisattva path of accumulation, but I could see the tip of the Bodhisattva path of accumulation. So this has come because of familiarizing myself with the path. And then with regard to Madhyamaka view of emptiness, Buddha Choney was really someone who had great interest in it. And after the Dalai Lamas had this custom or the tradition of going on some pilgrimage to the southern part of Tibet after finishing their Geshe degree. And then, because of that, I had discussed with Buddha Choney to do that with him. And then we could, so that we could go over Lekshin Yingpo, so I sent some message with, which actually was not very explicit. So I told him to go to Ganden or something, but then this didn't materialize. So in the 60s, perhaps I had realized the gross level of selflessness of person. In Rinpoche's Elucidation of the Thought, which is a commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara, where I came across this phrase, things are merely designated. I mean, it gave me a kind of a lightning bolt, I mean, sort of striking me. So after that, where I actually thought about a person and shifted or this experience, I could gain some experience of selfless person. But then when I shifted this reasoning to other phenomena like physical aggregates and so forth, then this didn't happen. So that shows that I had a gross realization of gross selflessness of persons. And then later I also read these 4 texts on Madhyamaka by Tsongkhapa, the Ocean of Reasoning, commentary on the Madhyamaka Karika, and also Lekshin Yingpo, and also Gongpa Rapsil, Elucidation of Thoughts, which is commentary on Madhyamaka Avatara, and so I could have some experience with regards to how things do not have any intrinsic existence from reading these. So recently I met somebody who asked about emptiness. So I told him that it's very good that you have this interest, but I told him that I told her that regarding emptiness, it can the realization of emptiness will not happen like switching on and off of a light bulb. So you need to go through the process of learning about emptiness and then reflecting on them. So when for us, we think about doing this kind of reflection and meditation on emptiness for months, years, and even eons and eons. And so the realization of emptiness cannot come just like that without putting effort. So for me, it has taken over 60 years, almost 60 years, to gain some understanding of. So if you persevere in this meditation, emptiness, then you can see some change, transformation taking place within yourself. So it would be very important to make this understanding of emptiness your own experience.
I can tell you a story. Here, Tushi Rinpoche was a great master. And it is not something that he came to India and tried to be practicing all religion. He was doing the same even in Tibet at that time. And he used to tell us a lot of stories. And one of his great masters is Gyumey Tantric, and Rinpoche says that he has great respect and affection for Rinpoche. And I'm also a close friend of Rinpoche, so he's also very close to Ganden Podang. And I told him that we Gelugpa are great practitioners, and he told that Geshe are just flower of the words, and there is no fruit of it. And I think this is a kind of instruction, even though Rinpoche told me as a kind of a joke, but I think this is a kind of instruction for all of us that we have to practice. And we have many geshes and practitioners here, so we have to try to find a result, a fruit, without always concentrating or applying all energies on studies. And I think that if one strive hard, I think that compared to taking the example from my own experience, I think that if anyone put strive and make effort, I'm sure that within a few years, and I think there will be a realization. I am also making a hope that we will all be able to gain some realization. And here in the verse number 7, especially for an ordinary person, the sole way to determine the precise reality of things. And generally, when it comes to the Tantra initiation, the focus meditation, the contemplative meditation is made more important. And this, I feel, is according to the highest Yoga Tantra. When it comes to the highest wisdom realizing emptiness, and I think that is merely the focus meditation, which is explained by Lama Tsongkhapa himself in the 5 stages. And the mind of the great bliss, at that time the wisdom realizing emptiness is merely the contemplative meditation. So at that time it's not necessary to put the analytical meditation. So therefore, it is important to study the text, the extensive text of all the traditions, the Gelug, Sayagya, Nyingma and all, and without being satisfied with the mere text, or not even generating or gaining a deep understanding of those texts. And also it is important to read the critics of the different traditions. For example, the Gaurav Jamba is a great Sayagya scholar. Similarly, Shagya Chokden is a great Sayagya scholar. So those scholars have put great critic and question to Lama Tsongkhapa's philosophical, philosophical system. So those, if we read and contemplate on those critics, it will be great. Even in our philosophical debate studies, we have 3 broad headings. The first, refuting the other people's view, then also establishing one's own system, then refuting or eliminating any kind of debate or arguments with respect to it. And during when Venerable Pema Jensen, and it was one day in Varanasi, I think Rinpoche was there. At that day, I told them, today we won't quote any text or sutras, so the debate will be purely based on reasoning. So sometimes it's easy to quote some sutras or texts. I think it may not be proper to say, but sometimes it's more like an order that you cannot refuse it because it is being already set clearly in these lines and texts. So the answering one, the person also have to say yes, and he has to accept. So therefore, I feel it is important to come to a conclusion based on reasoning. So when it comes to Vinaya, it is different because we pay homage to the omniscient Buddha. But otherwise, it is important to make effort to put reason. And if all the conditions are met with the reliable spiritual master, and of course with the reliable disciple who has all the qualities. So that is a different case. But unless we have such conditions and all, we cannot run over to such conclusions immediately. Gyumey says that when in the great completion practice, there is a technical term called absence of foundations and absence of the roots. So he thinks that it's very important to study very depth of the text. So what's the time now? It's 2:30. There are two vehicles to travel to perfect enlightenment. We're on verse number 10. The profound Vajra vehicle and perfection vehicle. Secret mantra is said to be much superior to the perfection vehicle. This is as well known as the sun and moon. While accepting those words to be true, there are some who do not ask what is the profound vehicle. So when it comes to Vajrayana, the schools of Tantra, it is important to gain a deep understanding and study of these vehicles. Verse number 14, not knowing the paths of three lower tantras and deciding that highest yoga tantra is the supreme of all class of tantras is just making an assertion. Realizing this, I familiarize myself both generally and specifically with three genres of action tantra, such as generous secret tantra. On verse number 17, within the third class of tantra, yoga tantra, I study the main tantras, the glorious companion of reality, the explanatory tantras such as Vajra pinnacle, and enjoy the feast of yoga tantra. Thinking this over, how well my destiny is fulfilled. Thank you very much, all noble Lord Wisdom Treasure. Verse number 19, and this is the first chapter telling how I first sought extensive learning. All teachings down a spiritual instruction, verse number 20. Then with a firm, intense and enduring faith in Manjughosha, supreme in banishing the darkness from the disciples' minds, I pray in order that all scripture might down a spiritual instruction and strive to fulfill all the necessary conditions. So therefore, I think the Lamrim practice, the stages of meditation, is an instruction to gain or develop the wisdom realizing emptiness. So when it comes to some of the contents, such as the two truths and the four truths, which are not very extensively taught in the Lamrim text, so we have to study those texts from the other sources. So generally, I feel that when we give the introduction to Buddhism as it is presented by Maitreya, it is important to give the introduction on the basis of two truths and four noble truths. And from the understanding of the two truths, we should be able to gain a broad understanding of the four noble truths. Then from there onwards, we should be able to gain the impermanence nature of the phenomena, and also to eliminate the one's attachment to this life and thinking about the importance of next life. Verse number 22, in this northern land, there are many, regardless of whether they have studied the text on epistemology or not, who say there is no graduated practice of the path leading to enlightenment. In the Compendium of Valid Cognition and the Corpus of Seven Treatises. The Compendium of Valid Cognition is composed by Dignaga, and the Corpus of Seven Treatises by Dhammakriti. Verse number 23, but they also take as authoritative the permission granted by Manjushri to Dignaga when he explicitly said, write this book, in the future it will become the eye for all wandering beings. Seeing this to be completely illogical, I especially looked into this and found that the Pramana Samajaya's opening homage is established the Pramana Siddhi chapter last year in Delhi. Among the few audience, I have an audience with some scholars from Thailand. They're from one of the universities, educational institutes of Bangkok, and some of them came to Delhi, and we discussed about the Four Noble Truths and its 16 attributes. And since all these practices are common to all the traditions and schools of Buddhism, and later, I asked them, when you explain the meaning of the impermanence and other 16 attributes, and I told them how do you explain? It's through the scriptural, based on scriptural meaning, or is it based on the reasoning? And they told me that they're entirely normally based on the scriptural quotes. And they explained the nature of the impermanence and other 16 attributes. So at that time, I didn't tell them anything, but generally I think that in any kind of text, so when it comes to explaining the Four Noble Truths and their attributes, of course it is always based on the reasonings. So the reasoning should be the foundations of all the explanations of Buddhism. Verse number 27, then I brought together Bodhisattva level and ornament of sutras, and with much heart and proper work, all the treatises of the invincible Dharma Lord, and those following him arose a spiritual instruction. So generally we have the 6 Kadamba texts. When the Lamrim is taught through the Kadam, there's also a way to taught through the 6 texts, and this lineage is almost extinct. And recently, when Khenpo Khongka Wangcho, when he came to Tibet, and when I first saw him, I request him for transmission of the Pramana Samajaya, and also the auto commentary of Chantakriti's commentary on middle way philosophy. So I took the transmission from Rinpoche, and I felt that that is a service that I've done to restore the lineage of those transmissions. So I have the lineage of the transmission of all the 6 treatises of Kadamba. Verse number 28, relying especially on the compendium of practices, which grants certainty on all the points of the path, with its gradated arrangement of the vast and profound teaching, I saw clearly the many points of the supreme treatise of Nagarjuna, such as compendium of sutra as stages of practice. Verse number 29, then relying on Buddha-Goya's well-explained practical instructions on the Dhanyanotara and the Virajana Bhumi Sambodhi, all the points of the path down well as spiritual instruction. Thinking this over, how well my destiny is fulfilled. Thank you very much, Noble Lord Wisdom Treasure. Verse number 32, the ultimate of all well-spoken teachings of the mighty sage is the glorious highest Tantra, of which the greatest and most profound is the king of Tantras, the glorious Goya Samaja. On this, the supreme philosopher Nagarjuna said, the essentials of the path are sealed in the root Tantra by the 6 limits and 4 ways, and thus they must be understood through a master's instruction following the explanatory Tantra. And I explained before, as for the Goya Samaja, the series of texts composed by Nagarjuna and also Nagabodhi, solely based on the Tantra of Goya Samaja. Verse number 35. Also relying on the lamb-like illuminator of the root tantra and combine them with the 5 great explanatory tantras, I study with enormous effort. And when it comes to the great completions and the great Samancha Tantra, as Tazan Losava said that within the from the great completion stage, the illusory body concept is the a kind of a teaching that has not been taught before. And I think that Lama Tsongkhapa also has a hard time explaining this. So when it comes to the illusory bodies concept, Lama Tsongkhapa has explained differently in the Namshak Rimba, and also when it comes to the elimination of the 5 stages. He says that the illusory body may arise when the 4th clear light arrives. So there are a few differences in the explanation of the explanations, which means Lama Tsongkhapa himself has a hard time explaining these technical difficulties. This is the second chapter on the middle period when all spiritual traditions arose as spiritual instructions. Verse number 37. Having thus become a treasure of instructions, I train to familiarize myself with the path comprising the common path and an exclusive path with 2 stages. And as we have studied, first Lama Tsongkhapa sought much learning based on listening to the teachings, and after that doing the contemplation of what he has studied. Then finally is the dedication. This is the 3rd chapter, how at the end I practiced day and night and dedicated all virtues to the spread of the teaching. In order to increase my own virtue enormously and to show properly the correct way to the many fortunate beings who possess a discerning mind, I've written this account of my education. By the store of virtue attained through this process, may all beings through this same procedure maintain the unexcelled contact of the Buddha and enter the path that pleases the victorious one. And this is composed by Lama Tsongkhapa in Ganden, written by Eastern monk Tsongkhapa, Lobsang at the Trim of Virtue Monastery. So next is a song of the 4 mindfulness. So first, the lineage goes from Lama Tsongkhapa to Gyatso Sherpa Singye, and we can also find teaching on the 4 mindfulness on Gyabab Saba. So among those lineage and the teachings, this one is a very short, and which is comprised of only 4 or 5 verses, and as a song, and this I find very interesting, and also you can memorize it, and when you have time, so you can even recite it. For example, when you sleep, and sometimes if you are awake and do not get sleep, then if you recite these 4 verses, it will be very helpful and beneficial. And when you fly and on your flight, and sometimes when you have to wait for a long time at the airports, so you don't have to feel stress. So if you contemplate on these verses, it will be very beneficial. A song of the 4 mindfulness as a guide to the way of the middle way. On the unwavering cushion of the union of method and wisdom sits the kind Lama, who is the nature of all protectors. The unwavering cushion of the union of method and wisdom. So we have when it comes to the wisdom and the method, sometimes the sun and moon can represent, and also the method and wisdom. There's also another praise song which also refers to the method and wisdom in terms of placing near one's heart. So there are different ways to explain the method and wisdom. Whether it is the Guru Yoga or any kind of other practice, at the end when we meditate on your Guru, so the Guru enters from your head and also through your channels and become one with your body. So there is also a way to meditate in this way. There is a Buddha in the state of accumulation of realizations and cessations. Beseech him in the light of admiration through casting away critical thoughts. Don't let your mind go astray, but place it within admiration and reverence. The second is the mindfulness of compassion. So compassion or the renunciation is based on self or other. So if you feel the compassionate for other, it is generally referred to as compassion. But when it comes to self, it is referred to as renunciation. In unending samsara, the prison of suffering, so when you refer to the prison of suffering, we normally categorize the three kinds of suffering, the suffering upon suffering and so on. But I felt very effective the presentation of suffering in the three principal paths. I'm not able to remember the verse now. They are being swept away constantly by four powerful rivers. They are bound tightly with fetters of karma, most difficult to escape. And they are bound tightly. So when we refer to as being tightly bound, so actually it arises from attachment and desire, and it also comes as it is presented in the middle life philosophy, and also in the Lamrim Chenmo's chapter on the special insight. So this all combine towards the importance of the elimination of the attachment and desire, which are the sources of all the ignorance. Is the conceptual, so even scientists explains that it is the conceptual mind which brings the attachment and desire in us. I have a scientist friend who is about 80 or 90 years old. He is not a practitioner of any religious tradition, of course not a Buddhist, but through his research for many years, almost for decades, he did research on many people who are stressful, who has problems with anger and about the methods to cure those illness. And his findings out of his research, he told me that, as I used to say, that when someone gets angry, so the 90% of the appearance of that object is created by the mind of anger. So this is exactly same explained here. The object to which we feel attached or anger, so the nature of that object is largely created by the conceptual mind that drives or that give a rise to the attachment and the desire. And they are trapped inside the iron mesh of self-grasping. So first, the conceptual mind, and so at the root of all these afflictions and emotions, it is the ignorance, and the ignorance, and also with respect to the mind that looks at our own body as self-sustaining. And when you point to your form body, so you appears the ego or the self as very strong. So that gives rise to all the afflictions. So as long as we are under the control of the afflictions, so we should be able to realize that there won't be any real freedom. So if we are able to contemplate in that contemplate, and that way we will be able to understand the second level of suffering. So this is same with respect to the generation of renunciation and compassion. If we contemplate the same thing towards your own self, we generate renunciation for ourselves, renunciation towards liberation. But when we practice the same for others, it is compassion. So therefore, in order to gain such a attention, such a practice, it is important that the master should be also qualified one. And qualified master doesn't necessarily need to be described by having a huge house or so on. And then Lama Tsongkhapa, in the stages of the path to enlightenment, spoke about the qualities of the spiritual master, and then how the then also the qualities of the disciple, then how one should rely on one's spiritual master. So those outlines are very important. And Lama Tsongkhapa also stated in the Lamrim Chemo that without being controlled oneself or subdue oneself, there is no way or no possibility to make to help others control. So therefore, it is very important to have a kind of understanding or the steps to subdue or control one's own mind according to the traditions that are found in the scriptures. Therefore, for us, if we have a spiritual master who has a lot of fame or popular, in Tibet we have a saying that the popularity or the greatness of a master is whether they have the number of horses. And Zabadu Rinpoche, one of the great master, he is a great spiritual master who is a upholder of the Bodhisattva's practice, but he is a very simple monk. So therefore, at the initial stage, it is very important to study the qualified master. Then after that, we have to find and look for such a spiritual master. So having found your spiritual master, then how to rely upon your spiritual master through one's practice or through one's mind. So these are the stages that needs to come later. Therefore, there are many other stages following in order to generate one's devotion and reverence towards one's master. And thinking about the greatness of one's master, the kindness of one's master being giving us the teachings. Then after that, thinking about from the self and generating renunciation and towards the other and generating compassion. Don't let your mind go astray and place it within compassion. Through not losing mindfulness, hold it within compassion. So having these common practices, and then once we do the direct contemplation in our daily days, it is important to have a good understanding and also contemplate very clear about the renunciation and bodhicitta mind. And the third one is mindfulness of your body as a divine body. In the celestial mansion of great bliss, joyous to sustain, there exists the divine form of your body, which is a purified state of aggregates. There is a deity in the nature of union of the three divine bodies. Don't view it as ordinary, but train in divine dignity and immaculate appearance. So any kind of Tantra practice, we find the mantra Om Subhava Shuddha at the initial practice. And Om Subhava represents the selflessness with respect to person. And Savadharma Subhava represents selflessness with respect to phenomenon. And the representation of the person or the self which appear to us is something which do not have intrinsic nature, which we cannot find if we look for its nature. And also, all the aggregates are something that we cannot find if we have to critically analyze further. So since even the aggregates cannot be found from its own nature. Therefore, how can the self or the person, which is merely designated upon those aggregates, can be found from its own nature? So in the lower tantras, we can find the similar Om Subhava in all the lower tantras, but the complete meaning and understanding of the Om Subhava can find only in the highest Yoga Tantra. And when it comes to the mind that contemplates, that meditates about the selflessness of the person and the phenomena, there are certain levels of the subtle or the gross level of the mind. And then also the stages of the first being the subtle form, the first, second, and third, and so on. And ultimately, when it comes to the clear light, it is the subtlest mind which understands the emptiness. Then at that time, we can also say that the Subhava, when you understand the meaning, is based on the object and the mind. The mind understanding. So when the term Benza comes, so the mind that realizes the emptiness is being able to remain firmly on the emptiness. And Subhava, so when it comes to the practice of emptiness, is generally more focused towards the emptiness of the mind or the consciousness. So generally emptiness can be the external things or any, but here the main object of the emptiness is the consciousness or the mind. And at that stage, the mind, the object of the emptiness, and the mind that perceives that mind as empty, so both are of one taste or just one unit, but both sharing the same nature. So that is a mind which is a very not a normal but a special mind that understands the emptiness. So when we recite the Om Subhava mantra, so this, as Gyatso, the second Dalai Lama, explains, so it has the potential to complete all the accumulations, both merit and the wisdoms, and also the ability to gain enlightenment. So if one contemplates further, contemplates as much as possible the emptiness, and within this emptiness, and if we are able to generate or develop the impression of the mandala, so that is how we have to contemplate. In the celestial mention of the great bliss, joyous to sustain, there exists the divine form of your body, which is a purified state of aggregates. There is a deity in the nature of union of the three divine bodies. Don't view it as ordinary, but trained in divine dignity and immaculate appearance. So here we should be able to gain a special understanding of the finding the three kayas with not different from each other. Then when it comes to the pride, also that's it. We can find in some instruction about when it comes to the explanation of the pride. But as of this now, thinking ourselves as an ordinary person, and also the ordinary person as a basis of generating the self-I. So without thinking about that self that we have before, we need to be able to contemplate in before us a kind of a new self. And based on new self, one should be able to contemplate or look at that self as being empty. So therefore, the pure, or which is the aggregate which is free of all the afflictions and the contaminations, should be actually generate or arise from the contemplated aggregates. So with such a base and foundations, one should be able to generate the pride. So there is a possibility that this will further rise into the main understanding of the emptiness. There is also a teaching, also a transmission written by Chung Basuchugi Khyentse, and he has said that if you think that the self as of now as an ordinary person, so if you think that that ordinary self or the I is the Vajradhara, then of course it is a wrong perception. So therefore there is no way that the ordinary self at present should not be contemplated or think as the Vajradhara. So therefore, whether one's look at when we have the pride of self as the Vajradhara, so the self, whether it's the ordinary one or a new self, it depends on the practitioner. Don't let your mind go astray and place it within profundity and clarity. Through not losing mindfulness, hold it in an attitude of profundity and luminosity. And also when we practice the generation stage, there are many ways of practicing the generation stage. And the next is contemplating on the emptiness. And one within the contemplation of the emptiness from the meditative absorption in the state of meditative state and post-meditative state. The first one is all the phenomena that we see are absence of its own nature, or as we perceive it, that there is not even a drop or a stain of reality within that. And also when we refer to emptiness here, the emptiness is something which encompasses all the phenomena without restricting to a certain phenomenon. So as it is said that the nature of the thing, all the phenomena, which is the emptiness, has been same before, so it does not change after Buddha gives teaching or not. The spirit of appearing and existing phenomena is pervaded by the space of ultimate clear light of suchness. With this nature of, there is an ineffable ultimate reality, but when emptiness is being referred to as something inexpressible, so it is not meant that emptiness itself cannot be expressed as it is, but the mean that the mind, the inferential cognition, and the sound which sound follows that emptiness cannot express or understood the nature of emptiness as it is. So therefore, the emptiness is being referred to as inexpressible. Also, the mind, when we get familiar to emptiness, we have to rely on the reasonings. So there are different series of reasoning, the reasonings of one and many, and so on. So therefore, self is something that we can, through our own experience, self or I is something that really exists. But then when you contemplate and try to find the nature of the self, there is nothing intrinsic that we can find. So therefore, there is nothing which can be established as it is, but merely designated or by popularity. So once we have such a strong kind of understanding, the self or the I is merely a designated phenomenon, then one get a true understanding of the emptiness. So therefore, if we have such a kind of understanding, then we do not fall on the either sides, the extreme and nihilism. So since when we contemplate as it is being designated, so therefore we cannot only the a phenomena or the nature of the thing appears, which is absence of its intrinsic nature, which is called emptiness. through not losing mindfulness, hold it in the ambience of reality. And the fifth one is at the crossroads of six collections, which are diverse perceptions, are seen the hazy dualistic phenomena which are baseless. There is a magical show which is by nature deceptive. So when it's not analyzed, so we can find all the phenomena as being existing without being attributed by the mind, without created by the mind. So when you have such an appearance, this is a kind of illusory or a magic. So since we already have the understanding through the meditative state and the post-meditative state of the reality nature of the things, so after that, when all the conventional phenomena appear to you as being by itself, then automatically another mind which looks at all those phenomena as being nature of empty appears, and look at all those phenomena as being empty of their own nature. At the crossroads of six collections, which have diverse perceptions, are seen the hazy dualistic phenomena which are baseless. There is a magical show which is by nature deceptive. Don't believe it to be true, but view it as having the nature of emptiness. Don't let your mind go astray, but place it in the nature of appearance emptiness. Through not losing mindfulness, hold it in the nature of appearance emptiness. So here completes the Song of the Four Mindfulness as a guide to the way of middle way. Lama Tsongkhapa passed down this teaching to Gyatso Sherab Singye, and the Dalai Lama, 7th Dalai Lama, put it in writing. So the next is the Interspersed praise composed by Choney Lama Rinpoche, and Ling Rinpoche received the transmission from Choney Lama Rinpoche, and I received the transmission from Yonzu Ling Rinpoche. And in Dharamsala, I have a discussion with Samdong Rinpoche, and Rinpoche says that it will be nice if we have a transmission. And I told Rinpoche that at Gyumey, as a preliminary teaching, I will give a transmission of this praise. So this is a real poetic composition, and we do not have the English translation for this text. So we will try to cover as much as possible. So this praise is actually based on the in praise of Tibetan origination. So the first verse is a salutation to the master. The first verse and the second verse, the three verses are starting of actually the praise to one spiritual master by the divine activities. The praise to Manjushri. So this text was actually instructed by the Kunchen Lama Rinpoche to Choney Lama Rinpoche to compose. And Choney Lama Rinpoche himself has written in the colophon that he has audience with the great many masters and have gained understanding about emptiness. And this text is actually based on the teachings of emptiness as is explained by Lama Tsongkhapa in the praise of Tibetan origination. And here this verse Choney Lama Rinpoche was explaining about the emptiness as being empty of all the phenomena and also the conventional phenomena of Tibetan originations, which are not different from each other and which are neither contradictory. And this is the topic and the main content of this text. And the next verse is speaking about the object and the emptiness of that object. And the object and the emptiness of the object are also not different from each other. And it is also absence of its intrinsic nature being analyzed by the four different modes of reasoning. Even though they do not have their intrinsic nature, but all the conventional phenomena appears to us as real. And this is the impure appearances of all the, whether it's nirvana or the unenlightened activities. And this is really a poetic verse. And this is a verse that often quotes by Yonzhen Rinpoche. So this is the first chapter. And the second chapter also starts with the salutation to Manjugosha. And also a salutation to Goddess Saraswati. There are a series of such kind of prayers called the Interspersed prayers that one master has composed the root and another scholar write a commentary to it also in form of verses and stanza, which are often called the Interspersed prayers. So it's just the first verse of the Prayers of Tibetan origination. He who speaks on the basis of saying. So this sometimes comes before the commentary or sometimes later. And when we think about the three worlds, so any person who lives in the three worlds are by nature undergoing some kind of suffering. So therefore ignorance is the one which controls or which overpower all the three worlds. And Kunchen Lama, when he distinguished between the Buddhist and the non-Buddhist, when he draw the distinction between Buddhist and non-Buddhist, he normally do the distinction through the nature of, through the philosophy of the self or the other, whether we will be able to eliminate the object of negation or not. So of course when it comes to the subtle object of negations, even the lower schools will not be able to give a clear explanation. So even the lower schools also, when they give the explanation to Buddha's word about being empty of everything, so they consider it as a provisional teaching which need to be translated or interpreted further. So generally nirvana is a permanent thing, but many things which are related to liberation need to be attained by making effort. For example, the realizations and so on. So even though nirvana itself may not be caused or happened by a cause, so but it is something that is being comprised or compounded by a cause. Also, the cessation, by nature, it is permanent factor, but it needs a cause for us to study, to practice the path, and after that you gain the truth of cessation. It's the second verse of In Praise of Tibetan Origination, whatever degenerations there are in the world, and so on. And but you have told that ignorance is the root of all the degenerations, but while as the other non-Buddhist interprets that the source of the sufferings are many, some can be self or other or both or without cause. So therefore your teaching on Tibetan origination is something different and superior to all those teachings. Then the third verse of the Tibetan origination. And this I feel is when we explain the terminology of Tenjung, the Tibetan origination. So Tibetan means something that rely upon someone else. So it gives the explanation about the emptiness. And the Tibetan term Jung or origination is something that you gain from it, whether it is something to grow or whether it is aging or any kind of activities, but something that you gain out of it or arise. So this Tibetan origination, the reasoning based on Tibetan origination, is the king of all the reasonings compared to the other reasonings such as Diamond Slayer and so on. The fifth verse of Tibetan origination. Whatever depends on the condition, this is devoid of intrinsic existence. What excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this proclamation? And here the Tibetan origination is also being referred to the Tibetan origination with respect to cause and effect and Tibetan origination of mere designation. So this second chapter concludes with the 8th verse of Tibetan origination. Wondrous teacher, wondrous refuge, wondrous speaker and savior, I pay homage to that teacher who taught well Tibetan origination. So here concludes the second chapter. So third chapter also begins by salutation to paying homage to Manjushri Ghosha. I think it's a Chandrakruti's explanation about when it comes to the meaning of the Praditya Samubhata, which is the Tibetan origination. So different scholars and the philosophical systems have different ways of understanding it. And also some schools' assertion of cause and effect as being one. Even at the causal level, the result is in a very inevident form. The 9th and the 10th verse of Tibetan origination. This way of Tibetan origination, those who perceive it as contradictory or established. So you, the protector, has explained the emptiness as Tibetan origination. And emptiness as the name or the title, and Tibetan origination as the subject or the content of it. So there are different ways of explaining the emptiness in Tibetan origination, which is all not right way of explaining. And Gyatso Rinpoche's the treatise on the 8 technical or the difficult points. So there also he emphasizes on the emptiness in the Tibetan origination, the way it's explained in other schools as being wrong. When verse number 11 and 12 of Tibetan origination. The verse number 13, therefore in your teaching, seeing Tibetan origination is held, that too not as an utter non-existence, nor as an intrinsic existence. The verse number 16 and 17 of Tibetan origination, because intrinsic nature cannot be negated. If phenomena possess some intrinsic nature, nirvana would become impossible and elaboration could not be ceased. So this third chapter concludes with verse number 17 of the Tibetan origination. And the third chapter is called Praising for Accepting the Emptiness and Tibetan Origination as One. So we will stop here because it's already 3:30. So tomorrow is the preliminary for the initiation. So I will read, continue to read before the preliminary starts. Whatever merit I have generated, I dedicate it for the flourishment of Buddha's teaching. So what should we recite? So tomorrow we will do the Guya Samaja's prayer. Shoda Zeve Tramve, Tabje, Yiji, Memba Sejin, Jave, Temba Urins, Temba Jin Chode, Majaban, Chaja, Nyambara Jube, Chode, Ninja Jube, Yerabjub, Pendete, Seva, Jeba, Shoseje, Jave, Meshon Tele, Ledo Chanjo, Namjirim, Namji, Yela, Pede, Shin, Jave, Zeba, Rendo, Jonjo, Namsan Jube, Tunjan. Today, Namji, Dado, George, Tashi, Yazu, Chogu, Yajo, Roger, Dembe, Chokundo, Dashin, George.